Well, good afternoon, everybody. As James said, I'm James. Oh, this one's obvious. Next and back. Okay, next. I won't bore you to tears about this, but just for those that you don't know anything about the organisation, I think it helps to set it in context a little bit. So, Birkbeck is a college of the University of London, was founded in 1823 by George Birkbeck as the London Mechanics Institute, and existed then and still exists now primarily to deliver higher education opportunities to working age Londoners. So predominantly part-time, predominantly in the evening, predominantly mature learners. I put that up there. I think that's, if I tell anybody anything about Birkbeck to make them think it's different to anywhere else, 50% of our classes start at 6 p.m. on a weekday evening. And our students look like you. I mean, not exactly like you. And as James said, I started at Royal Holloway, went to Sun Garden, and ended up at Birkbeck. Actually, interestingly, I was thinking about my so I'm not an infrastructure person, and I wouldn't say I'm an amazing expert on identity management. What I know about is how to try and get hold of different things that aren't really sort of talking to each other, and try and predominantly people and projects that aren't really talking to each other, and try and make something happen out of the morass of muttering that's going on. When I first started at Royal Holloway, there were two things I thought of. I remember going to a SunGuard, as it was, user group, and somebody talking about identity management at one of those user groups, and James is giving me the signal that I'm not stood behind the microphone, so I'm going to stand behind the microphone. Or is it that my flyers are undone? I don't know. No. Every institution has apparently got somebody who has been at the institution for longer than anybody can remember, probably predates all the systems, and nobody's quite sure when they first started there. They probably look like they're half eating a badger, and they're probably nocturnal, and they are central to their identity management systems. And we certainly had one at Royal Holloway, and we've certainly got one at Birkbeck, and I don't know whether that is something that's true of other institutions, but it tickled me at the time. Also, when I worked at Royal Holloway, we had what was called the Blue Book Working Group. Is anybody here from Royal Holloway? No. We had the Blue Book Working Group, and this was looking at their identity management system. And I remember after about 2 years being brave enough to say to somebody, why is it called the Blue Book Working Group? Well, you see, there used to be a book, and it was blue. And they used to just write the students' details in it and pass it around all the departments, and they used to take the details out of it. That was the identity management system. Anyway, I imagine it's probably not blue anymore. But so I'm just going to give you a brief taster of some of the things we've been doing around identity management at Birkbeck over the last couple of years. And there's some interesting parallels and some quite striking similarities that I saw with some of the things that other people have already said. But there were some differences. So I mean, one of the big differences, I was listening to Jonathan talking first, thinking that actually probably what I'm going to talk about is the sort of the first couple of years of what you've done. We haven't really sort of started tackling this until about 2 or 3 years ago. So it's sort of early days in that respect, but it's early days more recently in terms of technology, if you see what I mean. So, I'll talk to you a little bit about what we built and some of the things we learnt along the way. So what were we where were we coming from? There were some real key drivers in the foreground. So this is about 2011, 2012. I started my current role in 2012, and that's when I really started being involved in this. But we primarily were really keen to improve our student experience, our customer experience. And one of the really big drivers for this was that we, at that point, and actually still largely, but not quite so strikingly, but at that point, all of our students were applying directly with us. We didn't have anything going through UCAS. We're taking more through UCAS now, but still, the vast majority of people only ever have any contact with us. They were creating user identities to apply. and then they'd apply, and we'd make them an offer, and that would all happen nicely. And then at the point where we wanted them to enrol, we'd generate another identity for them, and then we'd expect them to understand the fact that they had not that one that you created, the one where you used your email address as a friendly alias that you could remember. No, this one where we've given you this gobbledygook string that is your user alias, and we sent you a password, that one, the one that you didn't get, the one that's in your spam folder. And we wanted to tidy that up. We wanted somebody to be able to come along to our website, present themselves, create an identity for themselves, and that just persist through their life with us. So that was number one driver. From an internal point of view, we massively wanted to improve the reliability of our user provisioning and deprovisioning because it was a mess. And took an awful lot of effort to keep it going and keep correcting all of the problems that were arising. We wanted to reduce the support burden of account management because we had a brilliantly implemented system where you could reset your password so long as you'd already set up some memorable questions, which of course nobody ever thought that they needed to do until they'd locked themselves out. A bit too late then. Yes, our existing setup was dreadfully implemented, and we needed to sort it out ASAP. If you've seen me speak before, you'll have seen this slide. But you know, first rule: once you've created a good slide, weave it into every presentation you ever do. And this pleases me. So this is just a little flavour of where we were. We were in silo land. So I'm going to upset James because I'm going to dive over here because I don't like standing in one place. But I'll raise my voice if that helps. So Birkbeck is a load of staff and students working for and being taught by a load of schools, being supported by a load of professional services. Each one of those professional services has got its own databases, or what they like to think of their own databases, and they love them and they own them and they want to control them and they don't want to talk to anybody else about them, thank you very much. And of course people have got identities all over the place, and you know, integration looks like this. And that might just be Birkbeck, or it might be other places as well, I don't know. I'll take the little chuckling I can hear as being, well, probably pity, but anyway. So that's sort of where we're coming from. I wanted to have the thing like the end of the James Bond thing where blood just sort of drills down at the end, but I couldn't work out how to do that in PowerPoint. Our strategy is to behave like this, so that we see all of our different corporate systems as part of a sort of a one whole, and our data is one whole for the institution. We'd like our professional services to stop thinking that they own databases and to start thinking that they own business processes. In order to do that, they'd have to understand what a business process was, but we'll get onto that. And underlying all of that, we want a common self-service framework, common business process management, common identity management, common reporting. So the identity management part of that sort of feeds into this sort of overall vision. Various other issues in the background, people with accounts in multiple systems. So our HR users are created in the HR system. They are authenticated against a password held in the HR system. Same for finance. There are other things, I can't think of them, but there's other things, lots of other things like that. Role data in particular is distributed all over the place. The things that, I'm saying role data in the loosest sense, but the control of what somebody is allowed to do is distributed across all sorts of different systems. We really want to, we have implemented a corporate business process management system, but the one thing business process management systems want, other than a source of users, is a source of role information, so you can decide where to route work to. And we've got lots of role information in its loosest form all over the place, but we want to pull it into one place. We had, and to an extent still have, but we've improved on it a bit, provision of identity data to other systems via a myriad of other routes. Flat files over here, database links over there, you name it, we're providing data to different systems in different ways, and we wanted to get a grip on that. Our ID card production was an absolute travesty, and in the background we could see that we were quite likely to replace our HR payroll systems, and we wanted to do something to disentangle that from the identity management woe. So this is where we were before August 2013. So when we started really looking at this end of 2011, beginning 2012, we used Active Directory as our to authenticate against. We used a tool called UMRA, which is produced by a company called Tools Forever, to manipulate AD objects. And UMRA connected to a whole load of our databases. It connects to our student record system, which is CIS. It connected to our HR payroll system, which is the University of Birmingham system. It connected to some other database for this password recovery tool. It was appallingly implemented. It was filled with a mass of enormous select statements that decided which bunch of students needed to be selected to be provisioned. The select statements included, you know, huge inline views that you'd take up 3 or 4 sheets of A4 paper to print them onto. Various places they select from functions that, if you didn't realise it, you'd run it again thinking that you were going to get the same results, but the function actually did an update in the background, so it was horrendous. And I think Joshua was saying about, can't see you, was saying about, he's gone, that's why I can't see him. He was saying about you can't implement these things with 2 people in a room. You can, that's what happened there. And then they both left. Which is good. I mean, if you ever want a corporate scapegoat, you know, pick the person who's left. It was a horrendous mess, and we'd do the, you know, it would every year there'd be all sorts of hard-coded years and dates and things in it, and it was horrendous. The worst thing about all this is you can see lots of things got lines into this, our student record system. I'm sure every student record system is like it, but boy, do Tribal love an upgrade. We're taking down our student record system twice a year. Basically means you have to take down your identity management system. We couldn't provision new user accounts when CIS was down for an upgrade. And the integration was also complicated / flaky that it might take us a day to do the upgrade, but it could sometimes take us a day to put it all back together again and get it working again, because we'd find that you couldn't boot stuff in the right order for it to all start talking to each other again. We couldn't provision accounts, we couldn't change passwords, because all the password changing went through Umbra, and if this wasn't available, but because we were feeding Unix password files from all over the place over here, your password changes had to be fed back. They were written back into the student record system as well as to the Active Directory. It was an absolute mess. So we had to get away from that. A few structural issues. And that slide's a bit more polite than perhaps I'd like to be. But anyway, in terms of the dependency, so as I say, you couldn't drop one part of that infrastructure without just stopping everything. And in fact, the worst outage we had was when we came to do an upgrade on our HR payroll system for RTI and auto enrollment. We couldn't change passwords for 3 days because the HR payroll took about a day the HR upgrade took about a day and a half, and then it took us a day and a half before we could manage to get everything working again afterwards. It's just horrendous. The soft dependencies, though, so things like the fact that we were writing a Unix password back into our student record system because somebody thought that having the student record system at the heart of our identity management system was a good idea. But the way that it had been implemented in UMRA, it wouldn't notice if the student record system was unavailable. So you could have people merrily changing their passwords, and it would be UMRA would be issuing basically SQL update commands to the database. Wouldn't notice if they didn't happen. So you could go on for days like that with UMRA not actually being able to talk to the student system, and then people would have one password in Active Directory that they could use to authenticate against some systems, but when they came to authenticate against something that required the Unix password file that had been generated from CIS, it would be out of sync with AD and a mess. What we weren't going to manage to do was get anybody to buy into a big investment in some big off-the-peg identity management system. This was 2012, huge changes to funding, massive impact on Birkbeck with largely part-time students, and fees went up everywhere, but it completely changed the funding formulas for part-time students. As it was, part-time student numbers went off a cliff, so that was an even bigger problem, but we didn't know that at that point. But we weren't going to concentrate, we weren't going to get anybody to sign a cheque for a huge amount of money, so we had to just do something ourselves. So, as I said, we needed to do something quickly, we needed to be able to show some results, and we needed to work with our existing tools and within our existing resources. So what we've done, we built our own identity database that we call the IDB. I always get confused when we talk about IDM because we have an income distribution model, and that's what we call that. So our IDB acts as an interface between all of our sources of identity, and we still use UMRA, but we completely rewrote the code in UMRA to provision and deprovision user accounts. And now all of our integration is with our IDB and authentication against Active Directory. There's no direct connection from UMRA to any of our downstream systems, and there's no connection between them. So even though we end up we do push our staff records into our student system, it's all mediated via our IDB. So what is our IDB? It's an Oracle database. In fact, it's a schema in an Oracle database. We've created a nice, simple Apex user interface. It's our central record of people, of our staff, our students, picked up from the student system, the HR system. We also have two new classes of people that we call 3PUs and bespoke users. So in the old world, our delegates of third-party organisations who booked our space, they're what we call our third-party users, our 3PUs. They just used to get created in the student system because they're a bit like students, let's just shove them in there. The bespoke users, which could be the emeritus professors or some consultant or some visitor or the window cleaners or whoever, they'd get just stuffed in our HR payroll system. We don't do that anymore. We create those records directly in our IDB. It's an action queue, so rather than issuing direct commands to try and update our downstream systems, we just put stuff in an action queue, and then we try and loop through the action queue and try and execute those actions. And if we can't execute them because the system's down for an upgrade, we just wait until we can execute them and execute them in order. But most of all, it's an abstraction layer that provides a simple view of data in the transactional databases to people who are trying to manipulate AD users. So they don't need to understand the transactional database. They get a very, very simple view of data. They don't have to worry about how that's created. And it provides us with the ability to override without having to fudge things. We explicitly override in our IDB. So as I say, students and staff are sourced from Alter HR and SITS. We're just checking for new users every hour. And if we want to write back into those systems, we've got actions. So, for example, we push users back into those systems, usernames back into those systems. Our 3PUs, our bespoke users, and in both cases, the users, the 3PUs and the bespokes are treated. In fact, the 3PUs, the bespokes, the staff, and the students are then treated all the same by the systems, the provision and deprovision. We have a concept of services and flags. So whereas in the past we had massive nested SQL queries that decided who should be allowed to log on, what we have now is we pull in records for people and then we apply flags to people. So we've got separate logic to apply different flags to different groups of people. So we've got some logic that decides what an enrolled student is, and it applies a flag called enrolled student to the people who are enrolled students, and we check every day, and when we see that they're not an enrolled student anymore, we end that flag. And we have a load of services, and the services are bunched under flags. So this one is the fully enrolled flag, and it says that they get an AD user, and it says they get an ID card, and it says they get Office 365, and it says that they should be included in the student password file. We've not got rid of that completely. It says that they should be allowed to use the VLE, and so on. And that's how we grant. That's how we decide. That's how we record who should be able to access what service. No, I'm not going. It's been so long since I wrote this presentation yesterday. I've forgotten what order this all comes in. But we can. We are flagging users both programmatically and also on override, and the overrides can be deny as well as grant. So when we get the things that come along at the end of the day when, oh, I don't care what the rules say, this user needs to access something. In the past, somebody would hack the select statement to add in an explicit union to and select this from dual. Yeah, I laughed when I found some of them as well. But they are explicitly recorded, and we record which user authorized it from what date to what date, or it can be for all of time if we like, and why it was applied. So our downstream system, so predominantly the most important and the first downstream system that made use of our IDB was UMRA to provision and deprovision users in AD. It is just looking at very simple queries from views on our IDB. It's looking for users that have been granted a certain service. So we've got a service called AD user, and the UMRA provisioning routine is just looking for users that have been granted that service that don't have an active AD user. And the deprovision is looking for somebody who's got an active AD user that doesn't have that granted. And UMRA uses, so there's a load of APIs in our IDB that do some write back. So we keep a record in the IDB when a user is provisioned, we keep a record when a user is deprovisioned, things like that. So when UMRA's finished provisioning, it calls an API and says, I've done it now, and we keep a record in the IDB. So this is an example of my action queue, and we're recording all sorts of things. We're recording in our action. Well, I mean, it's useful because we log all sorts of things in it. We record even things like which users have looked up each user using the user interface. And that's really useful because when you see a help call from a student and you go and find them and you see that every Tom, Dick and Harry has looked up this student in the last 2 minutes, it tells you something about whether you should make a few phone calls before you go back to the student. So, for example, here's some actions on the queue. You can see, user lookups. We're using the action queue to send emails to tell students that tell users that their password's changed. This is the action that updates the master user account record in SITS when a password changes. This one updates our ID card records. So also, any time we want to update a downstream system, we create an action, and then we try and execute these every 15 minutes. And we're sending account communications out from here as well, so new user accounts, suspended users, password changes, all that sort of thing. And as I say, there's a simple Apex. It's not a very pretty thing, but it's only used by our IT staff. And they can look up users, and they can act on users, they can change passwords, all of that sort of stuff. What am I doing for time? I've overrun. We've got self-service applications that use our identity our IDB as their source of identity, provide facilities for people to change their passwords, that sort of thing. And we're now doing password recovery properly with the, give us your email address and we'll send you a link with a hashed value in it, and you can then go and set your password, as opposed to having to remember in advance that you're going to need to set your password. So other things have happened along the way. Our ID card system and access control system were both creaking, and we decided to shove our ID card production into our identity database. So our student ID cards and we create cards for our third-party users as well. That's all outsourced. So what the IDB is doing for us here is it's it's providing an order management system, but actually the physical printing, we're shipping files to a company in Portsmouth who print them and send them out. But for staff, we print our ID cards from this web application, and we've also re-provided all of the integration to our access control systems from our IDB. We haven't yet really got as far as I would have liked with authorization, with role information, but we have now started to create a centralized role database so that we can try and keep a repository centrally of role information, so who are personal tutors, who's allowed, who are budget signatories, all that sort of thing, so that we can feed that out, but we can use that in new systems as they come online. But as I say, knowing where to draw the lines isn't always that easy. So, in our IDB, we do have a certain amount of authorization information because our services effectively give you a certain level of authorization information, but it's not very granular. But then you get right down into the, and should they be allowed to make an admissions decision on program X? That's really very detailed role information. And where do you say, well, at that point, I'll just leave that in the student record system? That's a debate that's playing out at the moment. So finally, my observations, given the environment that I'm operating in and the constraints on us, are definitely my top piece of advice. If you're doing something similar in a similar organisation, is take baby steps. We often. People get paralysed by making really big decisions, and I always think it's much better to have an idea where you're aiming and then try and get there in small steps, because people feel safe if they can move a little way and see, well, I didn't, oh yeah, okay, well the floor hasn't collapsed yet, I'm going to keep going. I sat in a few meetings when I first started my job with people who'd been sat talking about this for years, and they came together every week and they navel-gazed and argued for about 2 hours, and then they all went off again and said, well, let's do the same thing next week, because it seems like such a massive leap over there. We best not start until we're sure exactly how we're going to get there. Try and extract some value along the way. Actually, I think that was more about comforting the people who were making the journey, as opposed to some senior managers, because I don't think any senior managers really understood what was going on. But the people who were doing the work needed to see that they were delivering some value along the way. Involve all the people, even when it's so tedious it hurts. I think the number of times we had meetings about this, and it was really tempting to just think, oh, do you know what? We'll just stop there. And you can, I don't know about the rest of you, but you can feel a point in the meeting when you're thinking, oh, this is killing me being in here, and you could probably just wrap it up and everybody would happily leave at that point. And what I've learned is, although it hurts at the time, it is better to say no, we haven't cracked this. We need to actually work this out, because you'll only end up coming back to it. Or not coming back to it and getting tripped up by it when you try and go live with something. Allowing for explicit overrides and exceptions, they always come along, and the worst thing you can do is deal with you always have to deal with overrides, so they're better dealt with explicitly. At least you can then see what's happened. I think the biggest benefit of our model, if I can go back to it, is it allows for, oh God, it's a long way back. It allows for a delineation of responsibility. So what we struggled with in the past is we had this thing in the middle that was acting on AD, and it was reading direct from our transactional databases, and it required somebody, it had been implemented by somebody who theoretically understood the whole range of complexity there. And that's massive. I don't claim to be a particular expert in all of the fine detail of all of our transactional systems, and I certainly don't claim to be an expert of how AD works and how all this hangs together. What we've created is a system that provides an abstraction of this, and the people who look after AD read this information to act on AD. So in effect, it provides an interface between our teams as well as an interface between our systems, which is quite useful. And now I've got to go all the way back to the end, and there's probably one last bullet point. Yes, there is one last bullet point, and the bullet point is you can't explain this project to anyone who isn't intimately involved. They glaze over, which I found every time I tried to explain it to anybody who isn't intimately involved in this project, particularly senior people. So I'm convinced that in our context we've done the right thing, because we'd have never got, I'd still be talking to them now, and we'd have never got the money to do anything more exciting. But I see from other presentations that there's lots more exciting things we could be doing. And actually now we've set some of the foundations up and tidied up some of our infrastructure, doing some of the more exciting things. I think it's probably potential. So I think I'll leave it there. I've probably overrun wildly.
I'll not do questions.
We'll not do questions.
No.
Ask me questions.
At the end, there's questions at the end. We'll do questions at the end.
Okay, we'll do that. Okay.
Thank you, James.
Thank you.
Thank you.